If you have a business or if you have real estate, you have an identification. If you have a piece of paper from a bank, this is not an identification. I think the way of the entrepreneurial family is that they know that wealth is a responsibility. Primarily it's a responsibility, beautiful responsibility. When we look at the definition of wealth, wealth does not mean only material wealth. Wealth can be also your education is part of your wealth. If you are a runner, your legs are part of your wealth, because you can achieve with that. You can be the first going through the target. The world is changing quicker and quicker and quicker. And stagnation means finally ruin. If you are selling the company, which might be necessary, then there's the next question of responsibility. What am I going to do with the money? I also say we can't also go back to the gold standard, because the gold standard was not flexible.
Welcome to Wealth of Wisdom, a brand new program on my channel solely in English, where financial mastery meets timeless principles for living a meaningful and prosperous life. Here we believe that the true wealth encompasses not only financial success, but also the health, family, and general well-being to truly enjoy it. This is not just a program, it's a journey into the strategies, stories and lessons from the world's most remarkable minds. Join us by subscribing to this channel and start building your legacy today. Wealth of Wisdom, because true wealth starts in the mind. Good afternoon, everybody. Here we start with the first episode of Wealth of Wisdom. And we cannot start it and kick off this channel and this program with better guest than His Serene Highness, Prince Michael of Liechtenstein. Good afternoon, Prince Michael.
Good afternoon.
It's great to have you here, and it's a big honor.
No, and thank you. It's a big pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. So let's kick off with questions. Can you please share your personal story? What path led you to become the executive chairman of Industrie- und Finanzkontor, a leading wealth preservation institution in Liechtenstein?
This was not a clear path right from the beginning. I was mostly interested, and after my studies, I joined in the manufacturing industry. I was working for a while with a chemical company in Canada. They were more in the explosives and also agricultural business. But then I joined Nestle and worked for about 10 years for Nestle, a good part of that in Africa, and I was managing that. I came back from Africa, was then in the product management, but then there was a small company in Liechtenstein in the fiduciary trust business, in the financial business, which I took over first certain participation and the management, and then I took over the whole company and developed it. And so it became one of the leading companies in this area. And I said, actually, our purpose, our vocation is actually wealth preservation, helping mostly entrepreneurial families on their succession planning, on their protection of their wealth, and on their long-term and multi-generational succession planning.
It's quite a big jump from chemistry industry and then Nestle's food industry, right? Agriculture plus. So how was that transition for you?
Well, the transition, well, you know, it's like simply jumping into the water. I had planned originally to stay in the manufacturing area, but then there was this opportunity, I decided, and then there was actually no transition period. It was the end here at the beginning there.
So very deep waters straight away.
Yeah. But then I had something which I really could develop. And then I started actually my career as entrepreneur. I was a bit when I was for Nestle in Africa, because there I could also build up things. I was also a bit entrepreneurial. But I wasn't an entrepreneur on my own in this way.
Understood. Which countries in Africa you were managing companies
Well,
there?
I started actually doing certain things, but not yet in the top management in South Africa. Then I was for a while in Nigeria, but then I spent the longest time I spent it there was in the management in Cameroon.
What did you learn in Africa? Because it's quite different from Europe.
Well, yeah, I think you learn quite a lot because you have to do everything. And you are not in calm waters. You have every day a surprise. The things make then sense when you have understood it, but it is very different. And but this is also a good training because you can't go according to the school books or according to normal rules. You have to learn to decide, to be courageous, to be adaptable, and not being too stressed when you get into the difficult moments.
How to make a decision while being an entrepreneur, especially under pressure and while circumstances are changing, the environment?
It's. I don't think that there's a rule for that. You can be, when you're in a structured business, you have a lot of facts, which you have and which you can build up, and you have advisors and you have a committee. But that doesn't mean that your decision will be right. And whether a decision is right or wrong, you will only know
Afterwards.
a while later afterwards. And sometimes you have to say, okay, I have to decide something. And what is better? And then you have to take your judgment according to the best of your knowledge.
Are there any shortcuts or recommendation for other entrepreneurs to make such a decision under pressure and when you don't know the outcome?
Well, it's very difficult to say. I think one should stay honest to yourself, and not if you have the feeling and say, okay, all these people want it. If I have a bad feeling about it, but let's say all these people around me want it and think it's right, and I have a bad feeling, but I can't think about it. You should not be too impressed by sort of the spirit around you.
Yeah, because sometimes you have those advisors, right?
You have those advisors, and sometimes you have to be a bit independent from them.
Okay.
You should also listen to them, because that's why you have the advisors.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to make the decisions. But there is no sort of school book thing on how to do that. And I think every entrepreneur knows it. And then it's very important that when you see that you have done a wrong decision, that you stand to it, because there's no problem if you say, well, I made a wrong decision, and then to see how to correct it.
So,
and you have also to really judge, is that a decision which can kill my business, which has could have a huge negative impact, or is it a decision, if it goes wrong, you can survive. This goes also for investments. I think you can go into an investment. The investment is always a risk, but you should never do an investment which could really ruin your financial basis if it doesn't go right.
So here we bring the subject of diversification, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that's the protection.
This is the protection. Now, the subject of diversification, if you talk about it, it's always a question. If you are too diversified, you hedge against risks, but you have probably a much lower return.
Exactly.
So this is also a judgment how diversified you want to be.
And do you know what's the proper level?
And you can't start with diversification. Sort of the start is always the biggest risk. It's like a newly born. You are there in the world, and it's all of a sudden risky. It's risky. No, I don't, you know, management, entrepreneurship is not a science. It's more, I would say, maybe the word is wrong, art, but it's something which you can do, you want to do. And I think not everybody should think that he should be entrepreneur. If you don't want to be it, and if you don't want to do this risk and this anxiety and these things, then this is not bad, because we need, not everybody can be an entrepreneur.
Somebody needs to work for someone, right?
Yeah.
What about those anxiety that you brought, the feeling within the entrepreneurial life? How should an entrepreneur manage those feelings?
Well, I think you have to work, but you sometimes have anxieties because you have, and that's, as long as you are alone, it's not that big. But if you have already a company with employees, with clients, etc., you have a huge responsibility. And sometimes you have an anxiety that something might go wrong, and you feel, let's say, the weight of the responsibility you have.
And how to manage, how to weightlift those feelings and those responsibilities?
Well, there are certain things. If you have people you trust, you can discuss it with them. You can also discuss it in the family. You can do that. And I think this helps if you see that people are standing with you and are supporting you in that. But it's part of it.
So how to cooperate or discuss with the family the business matters? What's your advice here?
Well, I can't give an advice on that. It depends whether the family is interested, is less interested. But you know, if you have an anxiety, you can say it, and somebody can calm you, let's say, can show sympathy. But I don't think that there is a rule how to discuss it with the family. However, you should try, and if you want to have a long-term planning with the family, you should discuss also with the children or in the family the issues early, so that they know what it is about to be, let's say, the owner and responsible for a company, and to realize that that is a good thing on one side, because you get something moving. You create something, you create values, but that's also a responsibility and needs a lot of work.
At what age would you suggest that children should be introduced to business or discussing the business matters with a parent?
Well, it depends on what stage. I think you can't start early enough. But the question is, let's say when you have 5, 6 years old children, it's quite interesting if they know some of the people in the company, if they know what you produce or what your service is and what it is. And you will not discuss with them financial matters. They are not interested, and you shouldn't.
Or compliance.
or compliance, yeah, and all that. But you know, getting them interesting, and then I think the important thing is also, if we're thinking, that you raise curiosity, that they are interested in it.
Perfect. Can you tell us more about the Liechtenstein family? What is the family's history, and what role does it play in the Principality of Liechtenstein history and current affairs?
How long do you want me to talk about that? How long do you want me to talk about that? Well, let's do it shorter. Let's say the family appeared first. We don't know what happened before, in the 13th century in today's Austria and Moravia, which is now part of the Czech Republic, but also in southern Germany, as at that time landowners, and also serving at that time, it was the Duke of Austria. Austria wasn't an empire at that stage, it was part of the Holy Roman Empire. It appeared there. what sort of, and we appeared as an important family, so we don't know where that came from. What actually is remarkable that we did already in the 14th century a family contract, sort of a family charter, how to manage the wealth of the family, which was at that time it was land.
It was 14th century.
In the 14th century.
Amazing.
That was the first one
Really?
between three persons. And so it was in a very early stage. We had also learned around that time certain lessons because we had one in the family who was very important. He was called the Hofmeister of the Duke of Austria, which is a bit like a prime minister. And he had a big wealth, and he was a bit megalomaniac, and which wasn't very good because he tried also to build a church with a spire in Vienna, which would be higher than the spire of the St. Stephen's Cathedral. The Duke didn't like it and expropriated us, which was a very good lesson that we learned how to rebuild the wealth and to learn, and actually that it's not bad to stay, let's say, a bit more humble. That's also sort of not doing. The next steps came actually at the beginning of the 17th century, where there were three Liechtenstein brothers who made then a real family contract and started with the system of the primogeniture. It's always the eldest son of the eldest branch succeeding and having the most part of the wealth, but the other ones must do their work, their things, which was at that time was either public service, war, or agriculture. These were the main businesses.
And were he obliged to take care of the rest of the family?
No, the idea was actually that he would be able to support if somebody needed something, but the idea was always, and that was important for us, that we should never rely on that. Everybody had the obligation to do his own things and to create it. And we have it till today. That went all the way through. Next, and then we had a very extensive land ownership in which went down from Silesia, which is now in Poland, through Moravia into Eastern Austria. This was the main thing. And the next step was actually that was, let's say, a certain change that, you know, in the Holy Roman Empire, there were all sorts of the different states. The largest one being, let's say, Austria with the Habsburgs, but also the Kingdom of Bohemia, the Duchy of Silesia, but Prussia and all that. And then a lot of smaller ones, more than 100 smaller ones. We were at that time, in the beginning or in the 17th century, we were also princes, but not princes directly dependent on the emperor, but we were princes by the Habsburgs who were the emperors, but let's say we were Silesian and Moravian and Austrian. So there was this territory of today's Liechtenstein. It was the county of Vaduz and the seigneury of Schellenberg. And this is actually a quite interesting model. They were ruled by a dynasty called the Counts of Hohenems. And the Counts of Hohenems had too high public expenses because they had big political ambitions, expenses, so they spent too much money. And then it was in the rule of the Holy Roman Empire, you should not tax the population with more than 10%. And they increased...
Like the Bible.
Yeah,
right?
Like the Bible. And then they increased the taxes beyond that and had a very harsh way of tax collection, including jailing people and also a system of denunciation.
Sounds like today's word.
A little bit. And then, the thing becomes now interesting. So then the people complained at the imperial court, which was in Wetzlar in Germany, in today's Germany. And the court said that actually not the land, but the feudal rights, or the sovereign rights, not feudal rights, the sovereign rights would have to be so acquired by a family or an entity which would have the finances to put the public finances right and to put the structure in order. So we bought it. We bought it, and that made a change that we have then not been an aristocratic family anymore, but a ruling family, which was a change of rank, because then we were just reporting directly to the emperor. And the Holy Roman Empire was a little bit like the European Union. It was sort of semi-independent states. So we had
I believe
achieved.
there was less regulations that time.
There were a bit less regulations, and they were shorter and clearer. and the words were sometimes very clear, a bit astonishing today in their honesty, but maybe not necessarily all politically correct, but clear.
But snail was not a fish that time.
Say again?
The snail was not a fish that time.
No, it was not. No. But I think this was also not really the concern. But then we did something else which was unique in history at that time, that we basically rebranded the country and gave it our family name, the name of the country. It was the first time that a family gave a name to the country and not vice versa.
So that was like merger and acquisition.
It was, on one side it was merger and acquisition, and then also this change of name was new. It would be a bit comparable like one of the many countries today which are actually bankrupt because they have so high debts, and then one of the American billionaires coming and buying the rights to rule it and to make it and to bring order into it, and maybe rename it after him. But this happened. The next case, there was just a second case in history. There was Saudi Arabia, which was also renamed after the family of Saud. But that was 300 years later.
So we were earlier on.
We were much earlier. Yeah, we were first mover.
Setting the precedent, right?
Setting the precedent. Then we had, in Liechtenstein, we had then challenges again when in 1806, when the Holy Roman Empire was dissolved in the Napoleonic Wars. We were one of the few small ones who managed to stay independent. And we were then fully sovereign because the Holy Roman Empire didn't exist anymore.
How you managed to bypass the wars at that time?
But we were actually, for instance, in the whole context of the Napoleonic Wars, the country of Liechtenstein didn't play a role. The family played a role because this was one thing. We always knew we need to have strong finances in order to prevail. And that was always wealth preservation, keeping the wealth together. And let's say the financial power of the family and also the political influence. The then Prince was also for a while commander of the Imperial Army of Austria. And the political influence helped us to keep it independent, first when Napoleon did the things, and then secondly in the Congress of Vienna. And there was another challenge for World War I. Let's say our main partner was the Austro-Hungarian Empire that crashed, but then we managed to do this customs and currency union with Switzerland. Then World War II, or let's say after the Anschluss of Austria in 1938 to Nazi Germany, we all of a sudden had Nazi Germany as a neighbor. this was extremely challenging, but we managed to keep them out.
They were willing to invite Liechtenstein, but there were some Nazi officers, right, that stopped the.
Yeah, well, there was what happened was there was an attempt of a Nazi coup in Liechtenstein, and they thought that there would be a lot of followers to the coup, but they just had 5 people who tried the coup. And this wasn't, they were immediately arrested. Now, they were immediately arrested, so the coup didn't happen. If the coup would have happened, they had prepared on the border people who were sort of units to come in immediately, but then it was closed. So they didn't want to do too much. And the second thing which helped us was that we were not really a strategic target. So the interest, after the coup didn't work, I think they thought, well, after what happened, fortunately didn't happen, after what they called the Endsieg, the final victory, they would simply take it. But it was, we had to be extremely careful, and there it was also good to have this, they wouldn't have defended us, but to have the support by Switzerland.
And how did Liechtenstein manage to just fight off that coup in very early stage?
Well, there was, I think the important thing was that there were basically no Nazi support in the country. It was a very Catholic country. The church played a big role, and the family, it was my uncle at that time, then the ruler, he was very close to the population. The family was always very much anti-Nazi, so they had this support, and so actually police, fire brigades, whatever, fended it off. And we had also created already, because it was seen what was happening before, also with the young people, very strong groups of Boy Scouts. For not getting something like the Hitler Youth or something like that. So that the young ones were also going in the direction of being a Catholic country, a free country, and wanting to stay independent.
So how much effect had Catholic faith in Liechtenstein politics?
Well, it had always it played a very strong role, and still now it is very important. But now it is also a certain, let's say, it has less of an effect today than it used to be. But up to 20, 30 years ago, it has a very decisive effect.
Big thing that faith is supporting the ruling prince, then, right?
And the other thing was, I think, our political structure in Liechtenstein, because we are a country which has a mix between actually very important elements. It's a democratic country. We have political parties, we have a parliament, but we have also a pretty strong monarchy. We have a direct democracy as the Swiss have, and we have a quite high autonomy of the municipalities. And this is a system which works very well. According to the constitution, we have 2 sovereigns, the people and the prince, with about accordingly the same weight. Now, what our Prince Hans Adam always says is actually there is a different weight between the 2 sovereigns, is that, well, the people could abolish the monarchy, but the prince cannot abolish the people. But this is a very good, this dualism works very well.
I think it's also very useful nowadays, because before, in older times, especially like you said, that Catholic faith played such a big role, that there was that feeling or perception that the ruling or the power came from God, right?
Yeah.
And nowadays it's less the case. I think, in modern society.
This is less the case, and I think what is still important to say that the principle, also the politicians, if you're Catholic, if you're not even Catholic, if you're a Christian, you're still responsible towards God for what you do. You're accountable to the people and responsible to the people, but you're responsible if you're a Christian to God.
Exactly.
Also.
Yeah. Even more than to the people, I would say. Would you agree?
Yeah. Well, it depends. I would say it depends on the issues.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain fundamentals where you have things. So I wouldn't say that. I think on certain things, when it's going, let's say, on financial matters, etc., I don't think that God really wants to mix into that. But there are certain fundamental way. But I think what is important, this notion of responsibility.
Yeah.
That you have it and that you are doing really to the best of your conscience.
So what would you recommend to politicians that are extremely faithful, they believe in God, they're Catholics, and nowadays the modern politics is about abortion and other things that are very fragile within the society or brings lots of emotions?
Yeah.
So how you can conduct politics in modern society if you are Catholic?
Well, I think you can do it, and this is, again, there's also, like for the entrepreneurs, there is no master Bible, what is, but also you have to act according to your conscience. And then sometimes you have to see, this is my principle, what is feasible, what can I do? It should not be an extreme, it should be on some way pragmatic, but not expedient. It's not that you do something against your conscience just to keep the job of the politician. But you can do and said, okay, I don't agree with that. But if I don't go, if I don't do it, it might get worse. So this is something which I cannot, which actually everybody has to decide for himself. And this is always the challenge of Christianity. The challenge of Christianity is that we don't have a rule book. We have actually, let's say we have a rule book. We have a rule book, but you are free in your decisions, but you are accountable for what you decide. So this is sometimes very difficult for a Christian politician to see how to decide certain things and how to go along. And you have seen, for instance, there was an Italian Buttiglione. He was once recommended to become one of the European commissioners. Then it was said no, because there was a question of, I don't know, I think it was maybe abortion or any one of these questions. And he said, well, I, as a Catholic, I'm against that, whatever it was. I don't know what it was. But in my official functions, when it's the law, I have to go along.
Because there's some responsibility from the...
Because there's some responsibility. Now, he didn't get in the job of a commissioner because it wasn't seen as expedient. But this is a general way for a Christian politician. But this is something I'm not an expert to talk about.
Okay,
this was now a personal opinion.
Thank you.
Of an observer.
Thank you for sharing. How has being a member of the royal family influenced you during your childhood and as an adult?
Well, I think during my childhood, I would say it didn't influence me too much. It was a very normal childhood. What we had quite a strict education, strict timing, strict things to learn, etc. And always we were educated in stay humble, take your responsibilities. You are accountable for what you are doing. Now, when I had finished my studies and I started looking for a job, because I didn't inherit anything, I needed to have a job. It was a bit of a problem, because people thought in the companies, oh, he might be spoiled, he might be this or that. So it was, at the beginning, when I was looking for a job, it was not so easy. But then, when I made my career, I think what for me was also the way that I said I have to be, let's say, quite careful, because if something goes wrong with my name, the problem is bigger simply in the public, the reputational damage.
It's spreading across the family.
So it gave me, I had always this notion, and I think it was right, that I bear a bit of a larger responsibility as some people who have not this situation in this place.
What about the school during your teenage years or pre-teen years?
Well, I think a school was quite all right. It was.
Was it private school or?
Well, no, I was then in public school. Well, we had the first years. It was a private. It was private, but then afterwards I was a public school.
And nobody treated you differently because?
Well, it was there was once a bit problems that. But actually, in a negative way, it was a bit in Austria. I went part of the time in Austria to school. That some of the teachers thought that if they would treat us equal, or if they were careful to treat us, let's say, a bit more negatively than the other ones for not showing that they do some protection as a compensation. Yeah.
Oh.
So it was a bit, but it was not a big problem.
Okay. So do you have any strong emotions with that period, in the sense that you were treated badly?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't have. There were certain things, but I don't have an emotion about that.
So they were rather professional, but
it was professional. Yeah, and there's no need. And I think I don't think one should, if one was treated badly, which happens to everybody, one should have emotions about it. But one has to sort of to say, well, that was in the past, but now let's look in the future and actually a very part of population probably would like to change with me, so why should I complain?
True. What about looking for the first job? Could you work for some family business? Was that viable?
I didn't want to. I didn't want to. Well, I could now, maybe I could, I could probably have done, but I didn't want to. I wanted to be on my own.
Nice.
And the idea also in the family was one should really take your own responsibility.
And that's across the family history, right?
It is across the family history.
Everybody needs to make their...
There are certain ones who are wanted in the family business, but it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be a normal thing.
And do you think that's the best way to raise your kids, if you are raising third, second generation, and you're going to pass the wealth, that they should make their own finance, let's say, or build or start off building their own wealth in the beginning?
You know, probably. I think what is very important to see that the children don't see the inheritance as an entitlement. And they don't see, because, you know, there is a question of doing it just, and that goes to equality. Everybody gets the same thing. This is dangerous, because what is just is a very subjective view. It's a very subjective view. And if that is in the family, you have already a virus in it. You have a virus in it by splitting it. If we look, which is quite historically interesting, it was actually in Napoleonic time that these forced heirship rules were developed. And the idea behind was not that Napoleon was so, did feel so strongly for, let's say, the younger children, because the primogeniture was quite strong for the younger children. He said, I want to have a strong state, very strong state. And the biggest problem for a very strong state is a strong family bond. So if we give every child the same rights, in every generation when the parents die, there will be fight in the family. So we get rid of the strong family clans.
So everything was about to destroy the power of family.
The power of families. This law, the ground of this law was not sort of a justice or something, it was destroying the power of the families.
So people nowadays...
And it worked. It worked, which I don't think is good, but it worked. So I think the way of the entrepreneurial families that they know that wealth is a responsibility. Primarily, it's a responsibility, a beautiful responsibility, because you can, with wealth, you can achieve something. And with achieving, I don't only mean that you make the most of money, but you simply can do it. Let's say, when we look at the definition of wealth, wealth does not mean only material wealth. Wealth can be also your education is part of your wealth. If you are a runner, your legs are part of your wealth, because you can achieve with that. You can be the first going through the target.
It's your asset, right?
It's an asset, yeah. Your health is a very important part of your asset. And also, if you are intelligence, so you have to work with that. So this is all, you get that as a gift, either you get something for your elder, or you create a business yourself, or you create that, or you get, let's say, from birth on a good health. This is also part of, and this is all a responsibility with which you can do something. So actually, if we talk again on the inheritance side, or the handing on businesses, family businesses, it should be this question, it's a responsibility. And with that, also the children see that not everybody can be entitled to that, and everybody can be treated equally.
How to build this responsibility within the children to handle themselves and their wealth, or the family legacy or family wealth?
Yeah, I think it starts probably with the education, but in a very early child age, that they see it.
What age would you recommend?
I don't know, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. And also the example the parents give. This is also important. The example they are giving, how the family, and it needs also a frequent discussion in the family. Now, what I see as a big problem sometimes, that, let's say, somebody creates an important business, but he is really shy. He doesn't want to really address these things because he wants to have, let's say, permanent harmony in the family. So he doesn't address these things early enough. Then what he will, he might avoid short-term disharmonies in the beginning, but it might end, it normally ends up in a disaster.
And big havoc.
Etc. So there's also no, there's no master plans in life. Also here again, I can't give a master plan. But I think the important thing is that the children have from the beginning on a notion of responsibility.
And how to create that notion within a child?
Well, it's in the education. They have to look already as a children for their things themselves. It starts, I don't know, making order in the room or whatever, sort of, or getting them for certain task responsibilities. Children love that. Sometimes they think it's a nuisance, but I think you can do that. And the second way is simply the example.
Leading by the example.
leading by the example.
Yeah, children are modeling everything after the parents.
They're modeling everything and creating interest with them, that they are interested in things. And also interested, let's say, in what the parents are doing. And mostly, if there's a company there, getting a certain bond with the business.
Therefore, you said that they should connect with the most important people within the company, right?
For instance, that too. Or not even only with the most important people. You can have it, if you have a medium-sized family business, they can come and visit the father, and then they can talk with the person who is in the telephone center, and so on, getting familiar with it. Not only the most important ones.
So do you think this personal bond is the recipe for successful succession?
I think it helps. It helps. I don't think that there is a normal tool. This system of primogeniture, you can't do it in the modern times, really, because we don't have, in these old times, it was mostly land holdings. And land holdings they needed responsibility, but not specific daily skills. But it needed sort of responsibility. And the primogeniture made sense because it was from the beginning clear who is getting it. And it didn't mean that the oldest was the preferred child, but it was a given thing.
And he was prepared, right?
And he got prepared, and it was a given thing. And one would only deviate from that if the oldest one would just not be fit to do it. That was an advantage. This has gone away, so it has become a little bit more difficult. Who is going to succeed where?
In which field, right?
And in which field, yeah. So there is no massing. Maybe also certain families say, well, nobody of the family is fit to manage the company. But this is also not. But then if they feel, the important thing is that the next generation feel that they have responsibility for that. It could also mean that they say, no, I'm not going to manage that. I will look to have the professional managers and will become, let's say, a medical doctor, but I will really see that it is professionally managed, etc., and will be involved in all the major decisions.
But will they be able to find a professional manager? Because it's not also easy, especially if there is a first generation and somebody, this nester of the family, build the business themselves, and they have troubles often to pass the reins, right?
Yeah, they have problems, but finding the professional managers and the best ones is anyway a problem. Even if you have a big supervisory board, you can see in many of the large companies in Europe, did they really pick up the best CEO? Not always. So this is also a question, and there I think there is, if you are the heir of that, you have a certain responsibility and you have to look for that. That doesn't say that it is a guarantee that it will work.
Yeah. And do you have any advice how to find the proper person?
No, I don't have it. And this is, it depends so much how to do it. What is the business? The big business, the small business. What are you looking for? Do you want to have a big expansion? Do you have this? Do you want to sort of keep on administrating? I think what is important is the character of the person.
Yeah. You mentioned that it's nowadays much more complicated due to the fact that we don't have this land ownership. It's more complicated, very specific skills are necessary for the business. But it's also something else. The world is changing constantly. Nowadays with AI, emerging new biotech technologies, biohacking and medical interventions, the world would look quite different in 10 years. And how to manage to survive with the company, and that company may survive. Because if we are talking about multi-generational, we need to ensure that the company may survive, right?
That this is true. You have to be, because the world is changing quicker and quicker, and stagnation means finally ruin.
Exactly.
So it has to develop, and there have also to be the decisions. It could be you have a great company, but you might not be able to do the transformation to the next stage because you might not have enough capital. Then you might merge with another company. You might sell it to another people. Now, if you are selling the company, which might be necessary, then there's the next question of responsibility. What am I going to do with the money?
How should people deal with the money after the exit?
How should the people deal with the money? And again, there is a question of responsibility. Do we want to go again into business, buying other companies? It's maybe not the best idea. It can be, depending again on your skills, or you invest, let's say, you make responsible investments in real estate or the capital market or whatever. But I think it is easier to keep wealth and to grow wealth of a family when you have your own business or you develop real estate than just being an investor on the capital market. But also that you can also be very successful as an investor in the capital market. But
it requires skills.
It requires also skills. You can also give it. But I think the problem is with, and this goes over the next generations, you don't identify yourself with your investments in the capital market. If you have a business or if you have real estate, you have an identification. If you have a piece of paper from a bank, this is not an identification.
And it used to be. Nowadays, it's just the computer screen, right?
It's a computer screen, yeah. It's not even a piece of paper, yeah.
Yeah, so it's even more virtual.
It's more virtual, yeah.
And we have virtual currencies, cryptocurrencies.
We have cryptocurrencies, we have fiat money.
Yeah.
You have that. By the way, there was once one of the Indian Ocean traders, and they used to pay to do all the trade with silver coins. And he had, and that was in the early 50s, he was very successful, and he had a huge store of silver. And then his business went also, his part went also in the oil business when oil was found there in the oil business. And then people told to the old patron, you can't go with silver anymore, you have to open a bank account. And you bring also all the silver to London and you make a bank account. And he did that. And then 2 years later, he went to London and said, I want to see my money. And the bank showed him a piece of paper with the money. And he said, no, I want to see my money. And then they said, no, and then he was furious, and he made, was in his country, a suit against it, because he said, they stole my money. I want to see my money, the money is not there. So he knew how to treat with the silver, but he didn't know what it, but this is maybe something different, but I think the identification is not there.
So how to manage through financial markets if you don't identify yourself with the wealth properly? How not to lose it by the second generation? Yeah,
this is, this is, I think, a problem. And also, liquid money is much easier to spend. It's much easier to spend. So it is, normally, this doesn't give a guarantee for a long-term wealth preservation. It can be, there are certain families who manage that, but it's sometimes easier to find the identification with something tangible.
Why those families are special, that they manage to keep fiat money and trade with that money, not to spend? Why they are special?
I don't think that they are special, but I think they are pretty rare. Because then after a while it was gone.
So are there any common traits of those families that manage to have those more liquidity?
You know, there are families like, for instance, the Vanderbilts in the US, one of the richest ones at the end of the 19th century. There's nothing really left.
So would you recommend to buy tangible assets that would last?
Well, I can't really give recommendations because I don't know, and I think every family has to decide on it. You know, another family who managed it was the Bessemer, and the Bessemer Trust is now also one of the most successful asset managers in the world. So this family kept it actually. They invested in the capital market, but then also they enlarged it and they're investing it also for other parties. So they have again their business, which manages their own money, but also does it for other ones. So there is again an identification factor.
And they have fiduciary duty.
And they have fiduciary duty, yeah, right, yeah.
So maybe having clients is better than managing only your own wealth.
Absolutely.
Because then you are more engaged, right?
Yeah.
And you are responsible for your family name, for your family legacy.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the solution.
You are more accountable.
So everything is being brought to responsibility, accountability, and taking care of your family name.
Yeah, and thinking ahead.
So to have a vision. Then.
Vision is something, but really thinking ahead and not following each move of the spirit of the time.
So which spirit nowadays, or the zeitgeist of today's world, is dangerous for the wealth?
Well, I would say any zeitgeist. Do you remember the dot-com bubble?
Yeah.
Everybody said we have to go into that. And that will come again and again. But eventually... And you can lose a lot of money. You can certainly go with, I don't know, with a little part of the wealth and say, what does it go? But if you go too strongly and you get too greedy, there's another thing, you shouldn't be too greedy.
How to stop yourself from being greedy?
Well, this is again a question, what I would say, a bit of wisdom. And you know, if you get, let's say, a recommendation for an investment, and you say, okay, this is wonderful, this return on investment, but then you have to look, is that really there? And you have to have a critical mind on it.
And how families should work with those financial advisors, wealth managers that are professionals in the field, but they have their own business. Maybe they have some conflict of interest, or maybe they are just making a mistake and they are risking the family money. How should family handle that?
Well, I think that, if you have this a larger liquid portfolio, let's say, on the capital market, you have to be careful whom you select as the manager. And also there is, I think you can see certain track records, but you should always try to understand what he is doing. If we take the case of Mr. Madoff, which is a very, he said, well, I have this constant return and I have this beautiful track record, but I don't tell you
how I make it.
And then
I never lose money.
And I never lose money. And then all the alarm goes on. You have to understand it. And I remember that was 30 years ago, 30 years ago, before the Enron scandal happened. That was, I think, around the late 1990s, I think.
2000,
Or
right.
2000, there was a very good money manager in Houston, where also Enron was, and he had a way, very simple. He said he makes a geographical diversification by only buying international companies. He looked for the products, etc., and he had a buy and hold strategy, which makes sense, and he made really good returns. He had a universe, I think, which he studied of 300 companies, and out of that he selected 20 companies. A very simple way. And I was once at a meeting, and that impressed me very much afterwards, that somebody said, well, you are also sitting in Houston, why don't you buy Enron? Which was at that stage one of sort of the stars in the stock market. And Fayez Sarofin said, you know, I can't tell you, I can only tell you one thing. I see from the whole track record and performance, Enron must be a fantastic company. But we looked at it and I don't understand how they are making money. And so I don't buy it. And I think this is
cooking books.
This is actually the rule. Yeah, and he looked how can they make money with the business model, and he didn't see the answer.
Therefore, he knew something was wrong.
So you really you have to know. Or if you're not one, you have to take an investment advisor where you know that he has the principle that he only buys things which he understands.
So basically, you need to be quite knowledgeable to handle even the relationship with asset manager or wealth manager.
Yeah, I think this is part of your responsibility that you look at that. You don't have to have a huge knowledge of the details, but I think you should have this responsibility to be able to pick up the right persons, or getting enough information together to pick the right one.
Sorry for the quick interruption. Thank you for being here. By enjoying Wealth of Wisdom, you are taking a bold step towards understanding not just how to grow your wealth, but how to live a life of purpose and abundance. If this resonates with you, don't just watch, take action. Subscribe now to gain access to further exclusive insights, conversation with global leaders, and tools to transform your mindset and your future. Remember, true wealth is built one decision at a time. Make this one count. So, Prince Michael, what advice would you give to individuals who just reach high net worth individual status, and what should they do next?
Well, this is actually they have really to decide themselves. Now, the question is, you have all of a sudden this status. You might have your company, you still have your company, your business, or however you reached it, and you can continue that. But I think you have also the responsibility to look how can it be preserved and what will happen after you. Or what happens if you are getting older, how to get on, let's say, the next generation. And I think this is a very important way of doing that. What is happening in the future? What is the next generation? Now, there are certain people who don't have a next generation.
What then?
Then they have also to think about what will be the future when I'm not there anymore, or when I want to retire, etc. And they have different problems. Maybe they look to their large family to find something and want to keep it in the family. Or they go into certain objects, philanthropy or art or whatever. But they have to have, I think they have an obligation to see what is going to happen in the future.
Because at the end of the day, if they won't manage that, the state would take over, right?
Whether the state would take over or something unnecessary is happening and so on. So yeah, it already starts when you have acquired yourself. It remains a responsibility.
Do you think it's selfish if people don't want to think about the future and passing the wealth after their death? They just say, oh, it's only for me. And they don't see that as part of philanthropy or passing to their heirs. Is it selfish?
Well, I don't know whether it's selfish. And it maybe it's not very responsible. Let's put it that way. I would rather say it's not very responsible. And it depends again. If it is, let's say somebody has a bank account of X.
$10 million.
$10 million. Let's say $10 million. And then he passes away and he has done, well, he might have a will, and in the will, normally he has a will, there might be somebody getting it. And this is not such a big responsibility. The second thing is, if you have a business, you have a responsibility towards your employees, towards your clients, towards your suppliers, maybe towards the place where you have your business. And there, I think you have the responsibility to really look what is the future of that.
Yeah, because those people you mentioned, they also have families and they may be reliant on the company, right?
Yeah.
So they cannot just go to the waste.
No, they can't, no.
Yeah. But some people they're saying it's for them. And do you think is money and wealth only for the holder of the assets?
You see, again, what I said, wealth is something with which you can achieve something. If you have money, you have a company, you can achieve something. And there is again the responsibility. It's not only for yourself, but I think you have the right to control it and to say, for what do I want to use it? And also a good part you can use for yourself. If you have hard worked in your life for a long time, why shouldn't you use some of these funds to enjoy yourself?
But you're saying some, not all.
Well, you could even use, that depends now on the size. It depends on the size. It depends on the size. You can use, if it's small, you can use all for yourself, which is actually a normal retirement procedure. But you can, it remains a responsibility that these things are going on somehow. Basically, also, if you say, now I'm making the most expensive but most beautiful travels here and there, you're also doing something for the economy where you're going to.
Exactly. Even buying a car, right? A very flashy car.
Buying a very flashy car, which is not really what I think is not. I think there's also the responsibility, there are certain different degrees of it. But why shouldn't he buy a flashy car? But it was, again, I had once, it was quite interesting, there was an Asian, and I quite liked it, who told me, he was also asked why he doesn't have flashy cars. So, I don't see why I should spend money on things which I don't need just to impress people I don't like anyway.
Exactly. That's great saying and very true. And do you think, because you're speaking so much about responsibility, which I totally agree, But is it something divine in wealth?
Well, I think there is something divine in everything.
Mm-hmm.
A beautiful tree, beautiful house. I think there's something divine in everything. Now, I can't answer this question.
Okay. Is the advice for this high net worth individual any different for ultra? So, namely, the person who achieved 30 million in net assets, $30 million in net assets. Would it be anything different?
Well, I think the more you have, the bigger is the responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, if you have a company with 10 people or you have a company with 10,000 people, the responsibility is, but it still stays there because you're also responsible for the 10 persons.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe the weight of the responsibility is much bigger.
Mm-hmm. So like in Bible, there were talents, right? And the most responsible person received more talents to handle,
Right,
which talent is quite heavy in gold, right? It's unit of measure. So unit of weight, sorry. So it's...
And I think this is a very interesting thing because it says there was the one who just wanted to preserve it and was hiding it.
Yeah.
And that was bad. And that means actually, if you get wealth, you have to do something with it. And this is your responsibility.
So it's also...
It doesn't mean that it has to grow at the maximum, but you have to do something with it.
So to carry on, to put that in motion, right?
To put that in motion,
Yeah. So how do you prepare your company and us for succession? Apart from building this bond, apart from raising your children with the responsibility and this feeling of responsibility, how you prepare the entity itself?
You know what is with many of the family businesses is that there is this certain, when I say this bond between family and business, and this is not only a one-way thing. Mm-hmm. This is also with the people in the company, that they are used in the family, they work. And normally also the ambiance in a family company is different than in a large public company. Mm-hmm. Because there is this personal thing. And you have also the advantage that you have one person who can really decide. Mm-hmm. He can decide. And he is also, if his decision is wrong, it's also the person who is paying for that. And that is, I think, gives a special spirit to the company. And normally the people who are used to that, they want also to have a certain proper succession. Mm-hmm. Because then they have also somebody where they assume, it doesn't always work, but they assume that there will be a very similar spirit, but maybe even a new boost, because young ones bring a new boost in it. But that works. And I see it in my own financial business. There is now, since 3 years, one of my daughters who is the CEO, and it worked very well, and the people were very happy with this. Mm-hmm.
But because of that bond with the industry,
they knew my children very well, and so on.
Mm-hmm. So that's the rule book, how to prepare for the succession, right?
Well, yes, but no, I don't really believe in rule books.
Uh-huh.
I'm not an anarchist, but I don't really believe in rule books.
So, are there any rules governing the business?
Well, you need to have rules governing your business. You need to have, but I think you shouldn't have too many, and you should have also the courage to adapt the rules if you find out that it doesn't have. Normally, you shouldn't constantly overrun the rules, but if it's necessary, you should adapt the rules.
Okay. What about the law, especially nowadays, European Union? We are overwhelmed by regulation. Yeah. Do you think it's good for wealth building and running the companies? And should we adhere fully to every single dot in a law?
Well, there are a few things to say. I would say that in order to be innovative, let's talk about innovation shortly. To have innovations, you need a certain freedom. You need a certain freedom so that your spirit can do it and that you can also implement things. When we talk about a lot of rules, I have to protect a little bit also the European Union because the national member states are not better. They are also setting a lot of rules. Maybe the European Union does not a big, but I think we should be happy that we have the European Union. And we can criticize them because you criticize also, and you want to improve things when you like them. But this is there. Now, we have a certain problem when we start regulating new systems before even the systems are ready to be used. Let's say the regulations on the artificial intelligence or the Digital Markets Act. This is actually really limiting innovation. This goes. This is on the side of innovation. I think we need, yes, I think we have too many rules and regulations, and that hinders the innovation. We have another thing. All these rules and regulations are also limiting your property rights and also limiting, basically, you can't really use your wealth anymore, even if you have the best intentions with it as you want to be. It's not only preventing you to do wrong things, it is also preventing you sometimes to do right things. So it is limiting, and sometimes it is also an infraction in the property rights. So yeah, we need rules and regulations, but today, and that's not only in Europe, it's also worldwide. And we have these supranational organizations who are actually sitting in their offices, are technocrats who have nothing, and who are hammering out rules and regulations, which actually layers of costs on conducting business and which are limiting the productivity. And I think this is one of the big, but it's not only a European problem, it's a global problem. I think maybe we are in applying this, or sort of in applying these things, we are in Europe, unfortunately, more perfect than the other ones.
That's why, is that why USA is developing more and they have more innovation because they're a more freer country?
Yeah, I think that they have a few advantages. They're a big country, and they are for these things a freer country. They have also they are also more mobile, let's say, going from one part of the country to the next. There's a different spirit. And they have another thing is they have a huge capital market. And I think the biggest capital market. And the problem in Europe is, I think I'm very much against too much centralization and doing, because I think many decisions are better taken on the local level. But there are certain things which we would need to do in Europe together. And there's one thing we haven't done, by all things, we don't have the European capital market, and we don't manage to make the banking union. And I think if we want to develop a lot of new businesses and startups, we need a large capital market, etc. So these are the difference. The Americans are more mobile. They don't have less local restrictions, and they have this huge capital market.
And do you think we can build pan-European financial markets if we don't have reserve currency?
Maybe let me say something else to the other thing of innovation. That other problem in Europe is that we are very risk averse. And we very little, if somebody starts a new business and he fails, we tend not to give a second chance. In America, if somebody got bankrupted, it was an honest bankruptcy, he can start immediately a new company. In Europe, if you have in your records that you have gone bankrupt, you will not get the credit anymore. You don't have a second chance. So this is to the whole thing. But then maybe we can move to your next question.
But can I ask the same question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So even if we have those pan-European financial markets, let's say it will be large, but we don't have reserve currency, worldwide reserve currency as Americans do, can we really build proper market?
I think we probably can. Certainly, this is an additional advantage the Americans have, but this should not keep us away of trying to find a capital market, to find a combined capital market, because it would already help a lot. How much the sort of the global reserve currency contributes, I don't know. But maybe it's also this lack of the European capital market we contributed that the euro didn't manage to get one of the reserve currencies. So it might go in...
It's intertwined.
In both currencies. And now we have these things with the political fragmentation we see now. There might be new reserve currency. I think this will give also some changes on what currencies are used for the reserve. But I still think that the dollar will stay the main reserve currency for the time, for still quite a while.
Will the euro survive?
I think so. It might not be a strong currency, but I think it will survive.
For someone starting the business career just from scratch, what guiding principles should they follow?
Well, I'm not Harvard Business School and giving for that guided principles. I think they should really try to do something in which they are interested, they see they are fit to do, and to do that. Now, that doesn't mean that normally in the beginning of a business career, you have to do also a lot of things which you're not so interested in it, because you have to learn the nitty-gritty, but I think this is necessary. But finally, you should have, because I think if we want to start a real business career, we should not look for a job, but see a certain vocation for it. And I think that this is the important thing, not taking the best thing and say, okay, this is not the best paid job. You can have sometimes, you can have much better jobs and much better paid jobs in certain areas you're not that interested in. But this is not a long-term strategy. So you have to really see, what am I interested in?
And how important is the long-term view? Because you are mentioning that quite often in our conversation. So how important it is?
You know, I think to be successful at the end, you have to have a long-term view. You have to have a certain strategy, which you also can change. You can change it. But you should have a strategy, and inside the strategy, you make your tactical movements. And this goes also for the personal career. But you can change it. You can learn, and there is nothing which should stop you to become more intelligent and then do the necessary changes.
And how long in years is long term, actually, in your view?
Well, it depends. It depends. You know, when you are when you think a family strategy, you can think 50, 60 years ahead. Or you have in the industry, you can try to think even longer ahead, but it comes anyway different. But you have to think ahead. If you have if you have, let's say now, business in a very new technology, You can say, okay, I want to go into that. I want to have to develop it. This is your long-term strategy. I wanted to develop it. But you don't know where you're going to. When the first explorers went into North America, they said their strategy was, we want to find out what is 300 miles ahead. But they didn't know how, they didn't know what. So the long-term strategy would have been, we want to explore this continent.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest was tactical.
So way shorter term view than applied on the big layer of long-term perspective.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What about teenagers? Because nowadays, I believe lots of teenagers don't know what to do after their school, or how they are lost, basically, in modern society. What should they do if they want to build themselves?
You know what sometimes makes me afraid? That a lot of teenagers say, I want to be an influencer. That means sitting behind the screen and putting certain things in. This is not a vocation. This is not a job. This is a game. I think that we have now a certain problem of orientation. This is there. You know, teenagers were always a bit disoriented. Mm-hmm. Probably you and me were not really an exception of that. Disoriented. You don't really know what you want to do, and you have to find it. In the older times, you were more restricted, also geographically. Mm-hmm. Now, with the internet, you feel that you don't have any restrictions, which is a feeling which is not right, because you still have the restrictions. But you have the feeling you are all over the globe. And we have also a lot of cultural changes, where the whole society is getting more disoriented. And people, on one side, we have more rules and regulations, but we have a lot of less personal principles. And so we are in this, in a very disruptive moment. And I think we are now in a moment where we have the biggest changes and finding a new way, like Europe had when we came from the medieval ages into the Renaissance area, where basically everything changed. Mm-hmm. And I think we have that. And I don't really know where this road is going to. Mm-hmm. Now, for coming back to the teenagers, I think there it is also very important that parents are there for their children, or other trusted people, that they are not left alone. Mm-hmm. And today, many of them are pretty much left alone.
Mm-hmm. People are working too hard, too much.
People are sometimes working too hard, spending, or if they work too hard, they're spending too little time with the children. Mm-hmm. Maybe making holidays and being on the beach or in the mountains, etc. But not being sort of this trusted relationship. But we are living for that in a very difficult period.
But don't you think that people are disconnected because they are being connected to their own personal devices?
Absolutely. I think this is a big problem, that also these social relations are getting more and more lost, because you work with these devices, you have less friends, and you have to. But I think the people who are really totally only connected to that is fortunately a minority. Mm-hmm. It's still the majority. They go and play soccer and they do this and that, which are really giving a group thing. So I'm not too pessimistic, but we have certain problems. Mm-hmm. And we have another problem, but this is not only for teenagers. these many rules and regulations combined with the welfare state take a lot of personal responsibility away. And people on the job have now their manuals how to handle everything. So they are now, even on the white collar work, they are more like the people who were in the old factories of the 19th century and early 20th century, where you had to do always the same thing and you don't have to think. And this also takes away, I think, a lot of the human creativity. It also takes away a lot of responsibility. I had once a discussion also with a top manager of a large corporation, and we were discussing these things of this whole lots of regulation which are limiting, and said to me, no, I'm so happy about them because I don't have any personal responsibilities anymore when I follow all these regulations.
So even nowadays, as a manager, you can get some paper from your lawyers, right? And just follow that.
Yeah.
And then you're not liable, right?
And then you're not liable. Also, but if he gives you the wrong advice, you can still run in problems, but you have an excuse.
Or you can sue them.
Yeah, you can sue them. But this is not the solution.
Yeah, because eventually the leader is responsible, right?
Yeah. And this is, again, the difference between the family businesses and the public company.
And do you think, because sometimes going public is a nice source of capital, you even brought this earlier on, to grow, you need to have capital.
Yeah.
And capital markets are a great source of that capital, right?
Yeah.
So going public within trying to keep this sense or structure, maybe is a bad word, but feeling of family business, is it possible to maintain within the family?
And no, I think it is possible. You know, there are certain companies, let's say Roche in Switzerland, still the family here, but it is also the capital market.
Yeah.
So you can have this combination. On the other side, one has to do look at the structure of business. There are certain businesses where you really have to have big scale and huge capital investments.
Yeah.
If you look at the older utilities, or if you look at the automotive industry, etc., you need that. It's very difficult to keep it, but let's say also BMW has still. It's on the stock exchange, but there is still a family who has a big influence. So you can find combinations of that. So I think this doesn't stand against each other, but still in any healthy economy, the middle-sized companies are still the backbone of the business, also in the United States. So we have to see these two things. Now, you can happen that you have a family company which goes into a size that you have to go public.
To maintain the growth.
And then you have this probably first agreeable problem, but then this company goes. But then, you know, I also believe in. I'm a big believer, let's say, in the ideas of the Austrian economics. You have then also the constructive distractions. So if these big companies become too sclerotic, they will end of it, and they can. And that doesn't mean necessarily a disaster for the employees, because then it can be part in different parts and in time being changed. But I think the two systems can live parallel.
What systems should be in place to maintain wealth? I mean, from the structure point of view, what's your recommendations, or maybe not recommendation, but what's your overview? What should be done to preserve wealth?
Well, I'm coming back to this one, and as I said, I'm not a friend of rule books. For me, it comes very simple, is this notion of responsibility. There is no general view how to do that. You can build certain structures. You can do as a family, which is necessary. It also works only with responsibility that you do certain family structures. This can be trust structures, that can be certain inheritance rules, this can be certain holding companies, foundations, etc. You can do it, you can give it a legal framework, and you can make, and I think what is always good, to have a certain family charter. This doesn't need to be a huge document. It's important that it is lived. And families, I know a number of families who have clearly a family charter, but it's not written down. They just know what to do. And this is, you can have a family charter of 40 pages and it was nothing, because if people don't adhere it. But you can have it sort of even a lived family charter. And I think this is actually important, which is giving from generation to generation.
Is this family charter enforceable by law, or is it just...
In most cases not, but you can do it into legal structures when you put it, for instance, as trust structure, etc. Then this is a sort of an enforceable way, but it's also not a guarantee of success. But it can help. It can help, and I think this is also part of the responsibility to put it into the right structure.
So what about Stiftungs, private interest foundation in Liechtenstein?
Well, this is actually the basic reason for these private interest foundations, to help and to give, let's say, family principles, family charters into a legal form, and to protect the family wealth for next generations, and to give a certain purpose to the wealth, because that can be quite rude, how the wealth is to be used, how it should be invested. You can put a lot of things in. And this is then legally enforceable.
Because the wealth is already there, right?
So the wealth is already there, yeah.
The ownership is moved directly to them.
The ownership, the family doesn't own it anymore, but they are the beneficiaries. And they should still have a total right of control in Liechtenstein. They can get all the information they want on it. They can't decide. They can have, through a way of a supervisory board, like a protectors, and let's say a family assembly or whatever you have, certain ways of long-term influencing it so that it doesn't become totally separate from the family. But it is something different, and they can't decide freely on it.
I know many people who are not willing to lose their control. By control, I say ownership, like this proper ownership right, and they don't want to pass it to any legal entity. What would you advise them, especially if they want to treat this family wealth?
I understand them. But I think then it's very important, in many cases, and when there are problems, probably the governing documents of the foundation were done not in the right way. I think there should be a comfort there that the history, let's say through a supervisory board, etc., that the board can't do what they what they want, that it stays in the interest of the family, etc. So it would be the right drafting. But it's true, actually, you can't do whatever you want anymore. You can make a foundation where you say I'm still controlling, I can revoke it, etc. But it then doesn't give the same protection. So there is a way of doing it, but I know for many I understand it, because you have worked 50 years, you have built up, and then you give it away. You don't like it.
Yeah, but should they be afraid?
No, I don't think they need to. What is important, that it is well prepared, well discussed. And the best thing is also that when you set it up, you have already a next generation with you.
Mm-hmm.
It should not become a surprise to the next generation.
Hence the responsibility.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm. And what would you say about the Principality of Liechtenstein and the place and the legal framework there, and how that place is unique?
Well, I think Liechtenstein has a number of, let's say, advantages, and I think we are very lucky, and we have to thank the Lord that we had for our geographical position and for our history. So this is one thing. But I think what is sort of tangible, we are at the same time in a customs and monetary union with Switzerland, which gives good stabilities, but we are also members through the European Economic Area of the internal market of the European Union, which is strengthening. We have, let's say, a pretty safe geographical location in the middle of the mountains between Austria and Switzerland, which are both not very aggressive countries, which is also an advantage. And then we have really, but I think it's deeply ingrained in the constitution and also in the spirit of the people, like in Switzerland, the respect of property rights. Mm-hmm. So this is also a very strong way. It's a very stable political structure. We talked about it before. So this and Liechtenstein does, for instance, this structuring foundation trust business and this wealth preservation, also with the banking sector, with the trust sector, with the asset managers. We have a quite old traditions in it and a lot of know-how.
Mm-hmm. So also...
And diverse economy, because the number one sector is not the financial sector, it's manufacturing.
Mm-hmm. Big companies like Hilti, right?
Like Hilti, for instance.
Yeah. There are also some biotech, or...
There is less biotech, but we have other ones which are very technological in certain high value added. We have one of the largest dental medtech companies in the world. We have a lot in this area, but there's also some biotech, not too much.
So also this experience within courts, with this legal framework where property rights are quite tangible and important in the sense of the country history, is also important, right? So the courts know how to handle it.
They know how to handle it.
Mm-hmm. And
not everybody is always happy with the rules of the court, because there's normally a winner and a loser, but they know how to handle it.
Mm-hmm. And what's your take on Polish private interest foundations? Because we have those regulations, and nowadays, I don't know if you know that they want to change the fiscal regulation around the foundations.
Yeah. I think we are very happy that the more countries make these foundations, the better it is. We don't see it as a competition, because this market is simply worldwide very big. But it helps actually the notion to keep private wealth in private hands, which is very, very important to have it. So I think it's very good that Poland introduced it. I think the miracle of success with foundations is to change as little as possible. Because you make a foundation for planning of very long term, multigenerational. And if from the side of the state there are too many changes coming into it, it is very difficult to use that as a planning instrument. So I think there should be, the important thing is to have as little changes as possible.
And they are introducing new rules after just 1 year of the foundation being present.
Well, it depends always what the changes are, etc. I can't say very much about that, But in general, what is important is planning security and continuity.
That's very important. And also the sense of safe of property rights, right? At the end of the
this
day.
is also important. But this goes also in this continuity and planning security.
And which country is the best in terms of property rights nowadays?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. Property rights are a bit under challenge, because if we knew, if we see also all the plans of the OECD, how to tax it, and which has sometimes nearly confiscatory ideas, etc. So property rights are under threat. But this is nothing new. Property rights were always under threat, and we had that. We had that in the past. Our family was expropriated a number of times. Also sometimes by the dynasty which were our best friends, even by the Habsburgs, we were once expropriated. So the state was always challenging property rights. Then you had robbers, you had families who challenged it. So property rights are always under challenge.
So how to navigate this changing environment throughout history?
I think it's part of what you have to do when you have wealth, and sometimes you have to do it, you hedge it with diversification.
So different jurisdictions also,
Maybe
right?
also different jurisdictions, different sectors, etc.
So which jurisdiction, apart from Liechtenstein, somebody should look through?
Well, I think you have to look at legal systems. I think that there are quite a number of countries who really respect them. And I don't want now to make sort of a skeleton of that. And it depends also how they work, how they want to break it up. But generally is that governments say we want to avoid too much assets in one hand, which maybe I can understand. But then it goes down because, on the other hand, I think there was no regime in history, or rarely, I don't know, where not the state tried to overspend. And that gives them hungry, and the state has the power to get the money of their citizens, which is then long term. But I think, and the idea of parliaments in the old time was to see that the governments are keeping their budgetary responsibility and not spending too much. I think this role is now a bit eroded.
Now they're just choosing how to spend, right? Or how much?
Even that,
Or how we can push the boundaries of
how
that.
can we push the boundaries,
Like every single end of the year in the US, right? We need to move that ceiling.
Exactly, that's ceiling. And this is actually, this shouldn't be. And, you know, then the more money the government can spend, that means also with that the share of the government in the labor market increases. And that means also less people on the productive side than on the administrative and controlling side. And this is a long term not good for any economy.
Don't you think that fiat money even gives them much more power? Because nowadays they don't even need to collect. They can just print out the money or inflate the currency.
You know, I think we had, yes and no. It makes it easier, but you know, when you access it, fiat money, actually, the quantity of money provided by the central banks or by the creation of money by the bank should be in line for the necessity of the economy. So, but this is sometimes not so easy to establish and not so clear. Now, if there is more money created than that, it will at one stage end in inflation. It will be that the paycheck will come, and then it comes in form from inflation, which is also, let's say, a sort of a hidden tax. It will come. Fiat money is good. But before we had the fiat money, already in the Roman times and the medieval ages, you put copper into the silver, which was also like, this was their way of quantitative easing.
Or coin clipping, right?
Or coin clipping. And I also say we can't also go back to the gold standard, because the gold standard was not flexible enough. Because you need, when you have growing economies, the gold standard would be fine if the economies would be stable. But we need growing economy, more trades. So a more flexible solution was necessary. And but I think it would be good. I believe that the best legislator and regulator is competition. And I think we should have competition, and that's why I'm very interested also in these new cryptocurrencies. There will be certain things, there will be failures in there. There will be things which will go wrong. But at least it is good if the monopoly of the central banks is challenged.
And what's your take on Bitcoin?
Well, Bitcoin, we could make, this is maybe a bit advantageous to say, analogy to gold. Because Bitcoin, to increase the quantity of Bitcoins around is very costly. The mining is a very costly thing in energy. So it is something pretty constant, which cannot be increased. And so it is quite interesting. Now, if I want, and I think Bitcoin could be a good reserve. I don't think it could be the big trading money or something like that.
Because of the volatility, right?
Because of the volatility and the way if there is a big growth in trade, you can't follow with Bitcoin that you have enough, because you would get a liquidity squeeze. You would get a liquidity squeeze, which is the other side than printing too much money. You could get a liquidity squeeze, as you could get with gold. Now, just thinking of it, with gold, I have something. Here I have it. I have some gold. But it's only valuable if somebody gives me something against it. With Bitcoin, what do I have? And this is, I can't see it. It's a formula. And I think this is a problem with Bitcoin. I'm extremely interested in it. I think it's a very interesting challenge, but I don't have a firm opinion whether that will be the solution. But I think it's good if we get now a number of parallels, and if there is something which puts us in move and which might also force other ones to be a bit more rigid.
But don't you think that math and tech behind Bitcoin blockchain is much more tangible even than gold, because it's more solid in the sense that you can inflate gold by new tech, new mining solutions, desalting or getting that from seas, or even from space, let's say, if that would be ever possible. But with Bitcoin, you have this algorithm which exactly what would be the rate of inflation. And the amount of power behind this worldwide computer nowadays is such immense that it's even more tangible than gold nowadays.
I agree with you. It is much more transparent because you can know how much it inflates, etc. through the algorithm. Now, I think it needs also a change in our thinking. And if you say, for me, gold is still, if I look at that, it's tangible because I can hold it. This one, it has to be, and I think this whole technologies like blockchain, and I think blockchain is one of the most interesting ones, will also change our thinking, but we have to give it a bit of time.
You know, I see that is quite a big movement behind Bitcoin, and it's religion-like or cultural-like almost. So we get that personal affection. And what I understand from what you were saying, this personal affection towards real estate or business, it's a key principle to hold generational wealth. So maybe Bitcoin is that vehicle nowadays.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. Now you're giving me new ideas, but it's quite interesting. So I haven't thought about that so far. I've thought a lot about Bitcoin and how it could be sort of an asset class or sort of a thing. As identification, I can't answer you. You have to give me time to think about it.
So we need to have second episodes in some time.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly.
But love the idea. Really, I see people are getting so much affection towards this cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
And they are even fighting against another cryptocurrencies.
Yeah.
So there are people almost fighting like it will be only true God.
Yeah, but I think there's also thing. I think it will need still a little bit of time. But I think there are developments coming which are very interesting. But it's again, as we talked about, these people who went into the Americas in the 15th and 16th century to find out simply.
Yes.
But it is very interesting, and I think it will go quicker than it went in America.
Definitely.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to your children if they were being raised nowadays in modern society?
Well, I don't think I would do it much different as I did in the past. You know, there's a good education doesn't exist. They are always making mistakes, etc. in education. There's no perfect education. But I think I would again give them, I would certainly talk about different things because time has changed. Time has changed because my daughters are now in their mid-30s. So you're setting me back 30 years. So a lot has happened. But I think in the essence, I wouldn't do it much differently. Because it depends also on, you know, when you do the education, you have to be also genuine. It depends on yourself. What you do and how you give it on.
So what was the best education that you have already given her?
Well, maybe I've given them also a lot of bad education. I don't know. I don't know. I know I can't answer that. I always had a very good relationship with them. Sometimes we had some fights, but we had always a very good relationships. And maybe what we had, and I'm very glad, and I'm thanking God for that, with this, we sometimes had fights, but we never took it personal.
Is fighting with your child a good thing?
Well, I wouldn't call it fighting, but it's, you know, but you might have different opinions. And then discussing it and addressing it and saying, I think it is wrong if you don't explain to the child why you want something different. And that depends on the age. When the child is 3 years old, you can't explain everything. It's simply, you must not do that. And so certain things they find out, for instance, that the stove is hot. They will find out about themselves. But I think you have to be logical and you have to be able to explain.
Because maybe that's even the best way to transfer knowledge, right? Because there are emotions involved.
Absolutely.
And if you are explaining your stance, your approach, then you are properly teaching them and making this emotional
that's right. Yeah,
connection,
it gives the reasons why do I think like that.
Yeah. And you're sharing that you are caring also.
Yeah, and sometimes the children are right. That also happens.
But maybe then you can learn, right?
Yeah, exactly.
From your children. Because they're, they're like new blood, new brain that brings the fresh air, right? Yeah. Old money versus new money. What are the key differences in managing the wealth?
Well, I think in the technicalities, I think there are not big differences. Let's say the difference is that a new generation with old money should get certain experience how to preserve it from their parents, or hopefully get it. It's not always the case. Hopefully get it. Now, in new money, you learned how to acquire the money. And then you have actually, then you all of a sudden have the responsibility to preserve it. First you did it, you acquired it, you had a great idea, you were the creator of Bitcoin, whom we don't know who it was, the creator of Bitcoin that gave you wealth. And then, and then you're responsible to preserve it, to pass it on, which is a different way of thinking. Which is a different way of thinking, because if you inherit something, you should feel more like a fiduciary for the next generation.
If you inherit something.
If you inherit. Actually, if you made it yourself, and again, wealth is responsibility, you're also some sort of a fiduciary. So you have a responsibility there, but it needs probably a change in thinking. Of more, before it was creating, and then it goes into preserving. But on the other side, you can only preserve when you're also innovative. Because if you preserve and you're not innovative, you are doing what Mrs. Merkel has done in Germany. You run into stagnation.
But do you think that there are big risks within these old money families, that they are very strict, they are diligent, but they are not innovative enough?
Well, that happens. You know, you preserve only this one, and this is again, you have to be innovative.
This one talent
part again of your responsibility, that you try to be innovative, to do new things, because otherwise you are stagnating, and this is also a danger to your to your wealth. So you have to do it. And it's true, because sometimes when you sit there and you have enough and you're not hungry, you don't do that necessarily. But this is, I think, a better way of redistributing wealth than by forced heirship or by taxation. Because, you know, if there's an older family and they don't do anything for it, it will diminish, and it will go to other ways. So I think, yeah, it's a responsibility. You want to preserve it. That's the best thing you can do. But if you don't do it, it's not good for the family. But that's the way of the world.
But, you know, it's quite deep. The best way of redistributing the wealth is allow people to lose that wealth.
Yeah. No, well, the best thing of redistributing wealth is to create more and more, so that there is more wealth in the economy or in the country existing.
Abundance mindset.
No, it's not abundance. It's not abundance, but there's more there. Because if you redistribute from, let's say, rich to poor, there's nothing new created. There's nothing new created. If let's say, the so-called rich, or it doesn't need it, the people who have wealth, they do the right thing with that, their whole national prosperity will increase. And the best thing is to make a framework which is actually property right friendly, and that all classes can have can achieve it and can get some of the work without necessarily taking it away from somebody else. Because this way of redistribution by wealth tax, etc., is actually let's say a loser and winner relationship. And you want actually win-win relationships.
But they're saying that it's your fair share into the society.
Well, you know, you can, the word fair is also a very subjective view. What is the fair share? Should somebody who works little get the same thing as somebody who works a lot? Should somebody who takes no risk get the same thing who risks a lot? For me, this is not a way. No, the way should be that you have a general prosperous population, and not a way of an arbitrary distribution by some technocrats.
Are tax stealing from people?
Well, I think after at a certain extent it can be. Is it morally stealing? I think if it goes to a certain size, it is, and then it also starts to discourage people and doing damage. Stealing, I wouldn't really use this word.
Robbery.
Robbery, yeah.
Which word would you use for the tax?
No, I think it is basically an unjust appropriation. I would say it's an unjust appropriation.
Also strong. Yes, but it's really precise. What do you think? What should funders do if they begin to feel overwhelmed or exhausted by the day-to-day demands of running their businesses?
Well, if people are really exhausted and overrun, I think they have to find a solution that they put in either a management, a successor, etc. It doesn't help to run on things, because first, then and if we talk of a business, the business will start stagnating, and there will be not having the best climate. I think an important thing is also to know when to stop, or when to give on certain responsibilities. You don't have to stop at all. But you can move, let's say, from CEO to president of the board, or vice president of the board. So you don't stop, you're still there, but you give quite some responsibility to other people. So the moment you feel exhausted by it, not only sometimes you have ministers that, okay, I can't anymore. So but if it becomes a chronic status, then you have to do something about it. And the best thing is if you do something before you are in this chronic state. But sometimes it needs that you do something.
But don't you think that some people cannot just give away those responsibilities, the power, because it is their child, especially if they build the company?
Yeah, this happens very frequently, and it's not good, but it happens, and I think there's not very much we can do about it. But there also a functioning family is more helpful, because they can talk between themselves and can do that. But there is no recipe against it.
Do you think that the family is the, maybe not solution, but one of the biggest supporters of the somebody building their wealth? So it's maybe the family is the key factor of becoming extremely wealthy?
I don't think it's a key factor to becoming extremely wealthy, but I wouldn't say, and I think there are also people who became extremely wealthy without having a family. But I think it is very helpful for the preservation of that. Because if you look, there are certain people who made a big wealth and didn't have a family. For instance, looking at somebody like Karl Lagerfeld. But he knew what he wanted to do with his estate afterwards. So he had a purpose, and he was simply interested in what he was doing. So he came up. I think preservation was maybe not his prime thing, but it was regulated, and the whole thing had a purpose. So, but I think generally, if I talk in general, it helps to know that you do something also for your children, for your grandchildren, etc. It gives a certain bond.
How to properly choose a spouse that will be your support in building the wealth?
Well, I think it's always good to have that, but I wouldn't put now too much emphasis on that, because it is, yeah, you have a family business, you want to keep it, etc. A spouse can be very helpful. A spouse can be also participate in business. Sometimes this is positive, sometimes it's negative. I wouldn't go too much into that. I think this has really to be
so
to be developed in the family.
Are children more important and upbringing than the spouse?
I don't know. I think that it has to be, and I don't want to say that, because we shouldn't try to categorize these things too much.
There are people asking me, because sometimes I create content around that, what about long-term wealth building if they don't have kids?
Well, this can be because you might have, you love what you do. You know you're building something, again, building a business. This business has a purpose. It has lots of employees, it has suppliers, etc. It's already a huge, because also a good run enterprise, which is a private thing, and which the profits are used for the family, is also per se very philanthropic, because it creates all of that. So you have really a purpose with the company, with the business, and then you have to think, what am I doing that? Whom should I give that? And then certain people give it into, let's say, some sell it and make a philanthropic foundation. Some create a philanthropic foundation, or a foundation with an art, whatever purpose, and give the shares of the company into it. But some take also some other people, they live it, they create a group which could be on a more extended family or from somewhere else whom they want to hand it over. So there are different possibilities, but it doesn't mean that if you don't have children or a successor, that it is without purpose.
So purpose and responsibility, key factors. And do you think, is it better to sell the company if you have heirs and retiring, or better is to do operational exit and pass the company to the next generation or to professional manager?
Well, this depends on the quality of the asset, what does the asset need, and also what does the family need, and how is the family? Do I have one of my children who is able and willing to manage the company? Then I should obviously keep it. And the company has a future. Let's see the company has a future. Let's take these assumptions as a future. So this is one thing. The other thing is, I have children who are responsible enough, but will not manage it. But they can see that that it is being managed in the intentions of the family, and the best thing is. So they can do it. You can keep it. If you see, okay, we have children who are good, but probably not really able to do the two functions, not willing, maybe able, to, not willing, then it might be better to sell it, and then you could make a structure that they might not spend everything immediately or something like that, but then you might sell it and go on the capital market. I had such cases where, for instance, people had very able children. Each of the children has started its own business, which has nothing to do with the business of the father. And then they said, okay, I do want to run my own business. I will continue my own business. I don't want to have the business of the father. So 3 able children, but nobody wants to take the business of the father. And you sell it.
But was it because of the lack of engagement?
No, it wasn't a lack of engagement. It was simply that they found something which they're interested. They created something. It was not a lack of engagement. It was simply that they had, let's say, they found another love. They're extremely successful. They don't need that. But then they can use, the ones that they prefer that it's managed somewhere by somebody in the capital market. And if we need, let's say, a capital increase in our companies, we have a fund where we can go to.
Do you think it's really bad if a parent is pushing their children to be involved within the company?
Yeah, they shouldn't be pushed. It should be really a voluntary thing to do.
And what about fighting between the children? We have the situation nowadays in Poland with quite a big estate who will do Succession, and there is even this American TV series, Succession. And how to prevent fighting between the children for the state or for the power within the company?
Well, we had we touched this issue already before a bit. I think it is a question also of preparing them, discussing them, doing that. There is no foolproof system to avoid it. There's no foolproof system to avoid it, but you can try to hedge against it first, that the children don't really start to fight between them. And secondly, you can build also certain legal structures. But the legal structures work best if there is no fight. But they can help to prevent sometimes damages from fighting.
So that sense of entitlement, right?
The sense of entitlement.
And preparing the very particular child, right? For a succession, who is most able.
Who is most able, but you can find other things for the other children. But actually, it should be the most able. But you could find the situations where two say I'm the most able, and the other two feel that they're the most able, or 3 feel that they're most able. Then the question is, do you have enough businesses to change it or whatever? But there is no ideal solution.
But maybe there is something to prevent.
Well, I think it is creating trust inside the family. I think this is always what is. You can do legal structures in trust structures, etc. But you will then always have people who try to attack the structure, etc. And then if there is a fighting in the family, it will always be bad for the management of the assets.
Would it be to have third-party management within the company to be solution for that fights, or it's already too late?
It's sometimes a solution, but then it could be a fight. Who is getting the largest distribution? And some say, okay, we should reinvest in the company, and others saying we want more distributions, etc.
So we're going.
This you can solve with certain trust structures.
And we're going back to family charter and also
exactly,
preparing everything in the beginning, in the first place, in the whole upbringing process, right?
But you know, this one, you can't stop fighting. You know, also the best international charters which we see does not necessarily stop wars. That you invade your neighboring country. We have constantly. So it's actually if mankind actually likes sometimes fighting, and you can't prevent that.
How can we prevent the wars?
Well, there were a lot of things. We thought by creating the United Nations we can prevent war. By international law we can prevent war. I think preventing war you can only do if you are yourself strong enough to defend yourself so that nobody will attack you. Because they know if they attack you, they will get something on their head. I think this is the way to prevent the war.
You are the chairman of geopolitical intelligence services. Do you think that Russia can get to Dnieper River and NATO may intervene?
You know, it's very difficult to say. I think you know, so far NATO has refused to intervene, and so far also the Western countries have also refused to give Ukraine the possibility to attack Russian installations behind the Russian border, which was a huge advantage for Russia because they could do there what they wanted, and it was this is now not. But again, there is this word: we will not put NATO boots on the ground in Ukraine. Will the way that the Russians are getting in Dnieper trigger that NATO will intervene? I think this I can't answer. I think it will depend very much on what happens politically also in the West. It will be finally, the main decision will be with, and he doesn't have free decisions either, is with who will sit in the White House after January 22, and how the majorities in the two houses in the US will be. But I don't think that that's being decisive. But I think what the lesson, and this is in Europe to be taken very seriously, we have to be in Europe able to defend ourselves. Because whatever that ends in Ukraine, it will not be the end of the story. This is a very clear view, and that's not only President Putin, but in Russia, we want to have the borders of the Soviet Union. And there are still at least 3 other EU and NATO countries who were behind these borders, and the Baltic states. So this is very critical. So Europe must be ready to fight and defend itself, and also to guarantee the freedom of countries on the continent. Now, there are different ways and different discussions about that. We looked over the GS, but this is crucial. And finally, we are in a grotesque situation. We are, if we take also the UK into it, we are more than 500 million Europeans. And we need 350 million Americans to defend us against 140 million Russians. This is an absolutely grotesque situation. And if we look at the power of our industry and of our economy, it's a multiple of the Russian one. So there is basically no excuse that Europe can't defend itself. But
can they?
In theory, yes, but still, I don't think that at the moment, without the aid of the US, it wouldn't work. And And unfortunately, it might be that the Kremlin shares this impression I have. And if I only have the impression, it doesn't matter. But if the Kremlin has this impression,
That's more dangerous.
This is more dangerous. And so I think this will be the biggest homework for Europe. And I'm very afraid that if it comes, let's say, to a ceasefire in Ukraine, and that then some of the Europeans will sit back and say the story is over and we don't need to do anything anymore. So this would also be, even if there is sort of, whatever the solution in Ukraine is, we have to do something for being really able that European countries can defend the European borders and also the European interests abroad. And we don't only have risk with Russia, we have also risk from the south.
Is there enough political power to arm ourselves in Europe?
In theory, yes. You know, we would have the economic power, we would have all that, but it needs to be really the political will.
Yeah.
And so far the political will is more in words than in deeds, because you see, for instance, the German government talked about the Zeitenwende. We will invest now in defense, we will do something. If I look now at the budget of the coalition in 2026, there's nothing in there. So this willingness must come, and I hope it doesn't need a second Ukraine to have to wake it up. And I think this is also a big responsibility, not only of the governments, but also of the citizens.
Which country may be the second Ukraine?
Well, I don't want to make fear, etc., but I think that the countries which are most challenged are the Baltic states.
Is the Poland safe?
I think Poland is as safe as Germany, etc. But we are not safe. And I prefer, I think we should really be able to feel safe, and we can only feel safe if the Kremlin is afraid of us.
So
we can also trade with Russia afterwards, etc. But they have to feel that there's no game to be played with Europe.
So they only understand the strength and the power.
And you know, this was always in history that way. And we came to that, there's something on the paper, but if people want to fight, they will fight. And you know, there can be so many good charters.
So is NATO Charter any good for us?
I think the NATO Charter is good, yeah.
Okay.
And I think this one, the European Union and NATO gives protection. And that's why it was the easiest to invade Ukraine, because they were neither NATO nor European Union. And I think the time slot in the 1990s, when still Boris Yeltsin was there, to get Ukraine into the Western defense system was unfortunately lost. And after that, it was not really possible anymore, because it was feared to be a too big provocation for Russia.
Apart from Russia, is there any danger of World War III?
Well, I think the biggest danger is what happens now in the Pacific, between the US and China, and the Chinese who want to have this free access to the Pacific, which the Americans don't want. I understand that. I think the World War III, if it starts, it's not going to start in Europe. It is going to start in the Pacific. I still hope, and I think we can hopefully avoid it, but it is critical. We are in a dangerous situation there, because China has this hegemonial aspiration. They have it. They want to enforce it, and this is an extremely dangerous situation. And we have to see also that we have, you know, when I grew up during the Cold War, there were two big powers, the US and the Soviet Union. There was the Cold War, etc. And then there was Africa and South Asia and Southeast Asia and Latin America, and that didn't play a role. They were more or less in the Western country, were on the line, that didn't really play a role. Now we have a difference. We have changed economies, we have changed self-confidence, and we have mostly changed demography. And we have now, let's say, what we call the Western Bloc. This is the US, Europe, Australia, Japan, etc. This is less than 1 billion people. We have this bloc which we see as the, how did they formulate? Countries with different systems. No, with rivaling systems, This is basically China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. They are close to 2 billion people. So we are, I think, 1.7 or 1.8 billion. So we are, these two blocks are less than 3 billion. And there are 5.2 other billion people here on Earth who are not interested in this conflict, but who want to profit off, and where everybody goes there and said, you should be on our side. And I think they play it pretty well, actually, how not to take sides, which I understand from their point of view. But this puts another huge challenge on this situation, and puts also to certain wars. There's this triangle between India, Pakistan, and China, which is dangerous. Then we have the Middle East with the hegemonic aspirations of Iran on that and destabilizing that. We have these wars, which are now the most bloody wars at the moment in Africa. Eastern Congo, Ethiopia, and Sudan. And there are daily thousands of people dying, a sort of a multiple of what's happening in Ukraine. And this makes the world a very difficult place and a very place to calculate. And it might also, a war between big powers might also happen in a war on one of these hotspots. So it is a danger, and it needs good statesmanship, and it also needs, and I'm coming back also to a proper deterrence and defense. And if Europe wants to stay mostly out of conflicts, it needs to have a strong defense.
So everything ends with responsibility.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prince Michael.
Thank you
for visiting me in Łódź. So it's a great pleasure, and I hope we will see you soon again.
Thank you, and thank you for the patience you had with me.
You know, it's vast knowledge, so it's amazing for sharing with our viewers and with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Thank you for being with us. If this episode inspired you, there is so much more waiting for you here on Wealth of Wisdom. I hope you look forward to our new videos to explore the mindset, strategies, and stories of success from around the world. And of course, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss a chance to grow your wealth and wisdom. Let's build something that lasts together. See you in the next video.